Hello everyone! I am Alice of KHR Arts and Cloud Orchid Publishing, and today we are going to talk about the historical fiction Innocent Traitor by Alison Weir. Now, this particular book is a historical fiction. That means that it is a fictional story based off of historical events. In this case, it is based off of the short and tragic life of Lady Jane Grey. For those of y'all who are not familiar with who Lady Jane Grey was, after Henry VIII, the famous English king that married all the wives, after he passed away, the throne then went to his one and only son, Prince Edward. However, unfortunately, King Henry worked so hard to keep Edward safe that he literally had his nursery and his home scrubbed multiple times a day, every day. So Edward was literally never exposed to any germs whatsoever. So he had like no immune system. He also was a very sickly boy. It was just very clear that his heritage from both of his parents was not a good mix. He was just a very unwell kid. And everybody kind of knew he was not going to be able to be in it for the long haul. He was going to die young. And so a lot of these different factions in the royal court were all aligning themselves with these different players. What's really interesting, they were all aligning themselves behind women. So there was the camp of people that aligned themselves with Queen Mary. This is the eldest child of Henry VIII and his first wife, Catherine of Aragon, Spain. And then there was a group who aligned themselves after his second daughter, Elizabeth, the daughter of Henry VIII and Anne Boleyn. Now, the reason why the succession was not all neat and tidy after Edward is because Queen Mary was a fanatical Catholic. And what this means is that she never forgave her father for divorcing her mother. She and her mother lived in great shame while the divorce was going on, and he was married to Anne Boleyn, and Queen Mary had to face so many humiliations while Anne Boleyn was in power, having to help take care of Elizabeth as a child and just so many other things. So she was just very embittered by that, as well as she saw herself as a subject of Spain. She just held on to those roots that her mother was from Spain, and so Mary also saw herself as Spanish, and she very much wanted to ally England with Spain and reunite them with the Catholic Church. And at this time, England was officially a Protestant nation. And so there were a lot of people that did not want to go back to the old ways of Catholicism. But on top of that, most importantly, regardless of if people were Protestant or people were Catholic, people did not want another holy war in their country. So many people had already been executed by Henry VIII for staying true to the Pope and to Catholicism instead of converting to the Church of England. People didn't want another bloodbath, and that's what Mary promised. She basically promised that either convert or die. So the people that aligned themselves behind Queen Mary wanted very much for England to return to the papacy. The people that allied themselves behind Elizabeth were Protestants, and they wanted the status quo to remain. They're like, okay, we already went through this whole process. We already broke away from the Pope. We're not Catholic anymore. We tore all of that down. Let's just stay right where we are, be Protestants, and just move on with our lives, please. The problem is that when Henry VIII died, the succession was put back in order with Edward, Mary, and Elizabeth. So via this order, Mary would have to die before Elizabeth could come to power, and that was a problem. Because of that whole entanglement, there were also people who sought to influence the throne via other avenues completely outside of the trio of Henry VIII's direct children, Lady Jane Grey being the third candidate. So Lady Jane Grey is a descendant of the Tudor family via Mary Tudor. And because of all of this murky lineage due to Mary's multiple marriages, and this is not to be confused with Queen Mary, aka Bloody Mary, Henry VIII's daughter. This was Henry's sister, Mary, who was shipped off to be married, and then she came back and married Brandon of Suffolk in England, and eventually eventually Lady Jane Grey was had further down the line. So she is kind of related, but she is not a direct child of Henry VIII. She's like a removed cousin of Henry VIII's children. So this is where we're starting to get into that territory where the lineage gets a little weird and a little murky. But the reason why some people wanted to back this dark horse of sorts is that they wanted to skirt past all of the drama of Queen Mary and Queen Elizabeth and what exactly their legitimacy on the throne would be. Because Queen Mary also made it very clear that she would never let her sister sit on the throne because it was well known that Elizabeth was a Protestant. And in fact, when Queen Mary did take the throne, she imprisoned Elizabeth because Elizabeth refused to convert to Catholicism, and the only reason why her life was spared is because she was Mary's sister and Mary could not bear to have her executed. So to avoid all of that, there was a group that backed Lady Jane Grey. And the sad thing is it was purely out of greed and ambition. It did not have to do with wanting what was best for the country and its people. It had everything to do with the players that decided to pick this particular less chaos horse. Still problematic. Less chaos, though. And the main player behind this was Northumberland. Now, Northumberland had a son named Guildford Dudley. And his son was very close in age to Lady Jane Grey. So they conspired what they were going to do was have her, Lady Jane Grey, marry Northumberland's son, Guildford Dudley, in order to ensure that legitimacy to the throne, that Northumberland's family would be tied to the royal line, and effectively because Lady Jane Grey and Dudley were children. They were pretty much children. They were very young when all of this conspiracy was happening. So effectively Northumberland would be in charge, to the surprise of no one. And so all of this chaos was all going on at the same time. We had all the supporters rallying behind Queen Mary. We had all of these supporters trying to keep Elizabeth safe and possibly back her to be the next queen. There were all these people that were propping up Edward and like, bro, don't die on us. We need you to keep living, bro. And then there was this secret coup of Lady Jane Grey. And so effectively what happened was Northumberland had Lady Jane Grey and Dudley get married in secret, and they decided to barricade themselves in the castle where Edward died. And this was the easiest way for them to basically steal the throne. And Queen Mary was not aware that her brother had died. Northumberland did everything in his power to keep Mary and Elizabeth from finding out about this for as long as possible so they could solidify their claim to the throne, and for it to basically be like, oh, it's too late, we took it, nice try, bye-bye. Which, as we all know in British history, it's not like that ever stopped anybody. But that was their plan. It wasn't a very good plan, but it was a plan. And poor Lady Jane Grey was just in the middle of all of this hullabaloo. And she's a child. Like, y'all, she's a preteen. Like, throughout this book, it, like, talks through her being, like, a child, like, 10 years old, up until her death. And to give you some perspective, she was only 17 years old when she was executed. That's still pretty much a child. She was a teenager, an older teenager by that time, but effectively a child. And even the court of England saw her as a child. And it was a great travesty, and there was nothing anybody could do about it. She was effectively a martyr for the cause. Now, when all of this went down, Mary eventually found out that, one, Edward had died, and then two, this pretender had been put on the throne. So of course, Mary completely just hauled it to the castle and was like, hey, I'm queen, so let's get this show on the road. I know you think you're keeping my seat warm, but you gotta go. And she executed everybody involved with this. Northumberland, Dudley, all of their supporters, just gone. She was merciless. She did not care because she saw right through them that this was just a power grab. They were all greedy. They didn't care about the country and the people. They cared about being in charge and being able to do whatever they wanted to do. The only one that was given any sort of mercy was Lady Jane Grey, because Queen Mary recognized that Lady Jane Grey, one, was just a child, two, wanted nothing to do with this, because throughout the book she talks about she did not want to marry Dudley. In fact, he was awful. He was awful, y'all. He was terrible, and he was so terrible and gross to her. So that is a little bit of a trigger warning for this book, is Dudley is really awful and gross, and those parts can be kind of hard to get through in here. And so the fact that just all these people forced her into this, Queen Mary was like, hey, you know what? I know you didn't want any of this. I know you're a loyal subject. You just want to do the right thing. I will give you a free pass. All you have to do is convert to Catholicism. But unfortunately, Lady Jane Grey was a staunch Protestant, and she wouldn't do it. She's like, I'm sorry, but just as much as you believe in your faith, I believe in my faith, and nothing can change that. And unfortunately, Mary was like, I respect that fervorance to your faith, but however, these are my rules, and that's just kind of how it has to be. So she ended up getting executed, not even for anything she did, but simply because she wouldn't convert to Catholicism, which is really what kicked off the reign known as Bloody Mary and all of the innocent people that she executed simply because they refused to convert to Catholicism. So why am I essentially spoiling the whole timeline of Lady Jane Grey's life for y'all? It's because all of these are historical events. These are all things that happen in history. You can go online and Google it. You can go into any history book and it'll tell you this stuff. Everything that I said is all factual information that happened. However, what makes this book so interesting is it is written from the perspective of Lady Jane Grey herself. Fictional account, of course. So it's, we decided to, with our best guess, go in and be like, all right, what was it like to be Lady Jane Grey? What was her life like? What was her thought process? How did she feel going through all of this stuff? What did she struggle with? Where did she find joy in her very short, sad life? All that kind of stuff is what makes this book so interesting, because going into this, I already knew all those facts that I just shared with y'all. However, what makes this story so interesting is the perspective, because she is just so often just propped up as this very sad girl who is executed, and that's kind of it. But the thing is, she was a whole person with hopes and dreams and people she cared about and goals that she had, and there were also suppositions of times that she stood up for herself, as feeble as her attempts may have been. But that's what makes this book so interesting. It's one of those books where it's not about the destination, it's about the journey. It's about stepping into her shoes and seeing the world through her eyes, as well as I feel like it's a really good perspective on really learning more about this very short and chaotic part of British history, because British history can be kind of confusing at times, as well as it's long, y'all. It is so long. It makes US history look like a drop in the bucket with how just long and ancient British history is. But this is an especially interesting corner of it, and I highly recommend this book. I feel like the author just did such a great job of just really sucking you in to Lady Jane Grey's perspective and just going along with her. And I think that almost knowing what happens to her in the end honestly makes the stakes so much higher in this book. The fact that you know what happens to her, it's kind of like you're just digging in your heels. The whole journey is pulling you along, and you're just like, no, isn't there anything we can do to save this poor child? Isn't there anything anyone can do? And just knowing that her fate is sealed honestly just gives the story so much more tension and just gives so much more meaning to every decision that she makes. And also, on top of it, every decision that's made without her consent. So I highly recommend this book. It can be a bit challenging for some people to read. As I said, that trigger warning, as well as it's a sad story. This does not have a happy ending, y'all. Not at all. Even when Queen Mary ascends the throne, it's horrible. Like, Queen Mary was off her rocker. Like, what she did to England was pretty off the rails, so it just gets worse from there. Basically, Queen Elizabeth had to come and save the day and rein everybody in and make everything stop being crazy bananas. But this sad start to such a turbulent time in history is just Such an important piece. I highly recommend it. I personally loved this story. It's sad, the tension, you can cut it with a knife, and the fact that it actually happened just makes it all the more interesting. So I hope y'all enjoyed this video. If you did, please be sure to give it a like. And if you're new, subscribe. All right, y'all, thank you so much for watching. Take care. Bye-bye.